Hello. Today I'm going to be discussing the Casey Anthony case, and specifically I'm going to be framing it using Nicholas Battaglia's article from 2011, The Casey Anthony Trial and Wrongful Exonerations, How Trial by Media Cases Diminish Public Confidence in the Criminal Justice System. So hopefully you've had a chance to read over this article. Um, and think about it a little bit. So I'm going to break it down and just go over some of the highlights from this article and how this relates to the Casey Anthony case. So Battaglia starts off talking about the American criminal justice system and the fact that it is plagued by wrongful convictions. And at the time that his article was published in 2011, that the U.S. was in the midst of what some have called the innocence movement. And the innocence movement is focused on freeing people who've been wrongfully convicted of crimes. Now, the reality is that this concern about wrongful convictions and the innocence movement really isn't new. This has been a concern for many years and many centuries. You may recall Voltaire in the 18th century and his famous quote that it is better to risk saving a guilty person than condemn an innocent one. And also Blackstone, who said it is better that 10 guilty persons escape than that one innocent suffer. So, we have this foundation, and our system is built on this idea that people are presumed innocent until proven guilty, and that we have this presumption of innocence, and that it is better to let a guilty person go rather than have an innocent person suffer by being wrongfully convicted. But Battaglia argues that the reverse of this situation can also happen, and this sets the stage for his concept of a wrongful exoneration. And you can have a situation where someone the public perceives as being guilty is exonerated, and then the system itself is faulted. And the Casey Anthony case is a prime example of this problem. And Battaglia argues that the media really does a lot to fuel this problem, and that the problem really gets started with the media. So the overwhelming majority of the public gets its information about crime and about the criminal justice system from the media. And he says here that actual judges are undermined by Judge Judy. And I'll use my mother as an example here. She watches Judge Judy religiously. She watches it every day. And whenever I talk to her, she's always talking about, oh, well, Judge Judy said this or Judge Judy said that. Okay? But the reality is that the judges are not like Judge Judy. Okay? If you were to actually sit in on actual court proceedings, you'll see that they're very different from what goes on Judge Judy. But this is how the public gets its information about the criminal justice system. And most people, their interactions with the criminal justice system are rather minimal. And so this is where we get our information, is from the media. Okay. So Battaglia introduces a number of terms here. He talks about trial by media, the armchair jury, and wrongful exoneration. So I'm going to walk through these step by step, and then we'll look at how these apply to the Casey Anthony case. So first off, trial by media. So trial by media occurs when the media provides extensive coverage of a legal case through repeated news reports, analyst reports, and expert interviews. And we see this in a lot of cases that we talk about. Certainly we saw it in the O.J. Simpson case, and we saw it in the Casey Anthony case as well. And we probably saw it really back in a lot of the earlier cases like Leopold and Loeb and the Scottsboro case. All right. But we tend to see it a lot more now on television, and especially with social media. In fact, the Casey Anthony case has been referred to as the social media crime of the century. But because the media is reporting, one thing that we know about the media is that they tend to be very biased. and typically the media has a very strong pro-prosecution bias. Okay, and what happens is this converts the public into what Battaglia refers to as the armchair jury. Okay, and what is the armchair jury? The armchair jury are the folks who are at home watching the media portrayal of a trial or of a case. All right, and basically everybody has an opinion then. All right, and so the armchair jury comes up with their own conclusions about the guilt or innocence of the defendant based on what they're seeing in the media. All right, fair enough. But why is all this bad? Well, Battaglia says that this is bad because it can create a situation where basically the public is disappointed because the public and the armchair jury at home comes up with a different conclusion than the actual jury in the actual criminal proceedings or civil proceedings. Okay, and this is exactly what happened in the Casey Anthony case. So, leading up to the trial and during the trial itself, Casey Anthony was portrayed by the media as guilty. And therefore, when she was actually found not guilty in the criminal court, the public was outraged and shocked. Okay? And so there was a lot of upset because the public got one view of the case, all right, through the media, which was very biased and tended to have a strong pro-prosecution bias, all right. But then we had a very different verdict that was reached in court versus what people at home thought, all right. And so that leads to this concept of a wrongful exoneration, all right. And basically, a wrongful exoneration, according to Battaglia, is when the armchair jury votes to convict, yet the actual jury votes to acquit. Okay? And he argues that this is bad and it affects not only the individual in the case, but it also affects the entire criminal justice system. So I'm going to move now to his formal definition of a wrongful exoneration, and we'll break it down and examine it. So, a wrongful exoneration. He defines in his article a wrongful exoneration as a legal exoneration in which the defendant is acquitted for the allegations brought against him or her at or prior to trial by the criminal justice system, but to the disagreement of the public at large whom believes he or she is guilty. So, in other words, the public or the armchair jury at home has decided that someone is guilty even though the criminal justice system is not. And Battaglia says that there are two conditions that are present here. First, the defendant has been acquitted by a judge or jury and the criminal justice system. Okay, so we have to see acquittal by a judge, jury, and the CJ system. And the second condition is that the public believes the defendant is guilty. Okay, now it's important to point out here that the theory does not make any assumptions about whether or not the person is factually innocent or guilty, just whether these two conditions exist. Okay, and so clearly these conditions existed in the Casey Anthony case. All right, because Casey Anthony, as we know, was acquitted by the jury. The jury found her not guilty. Okay, so from a legal standpoint, she's not guilty of the offense. However, the public believed that she was guilty, all right, overwhelmingly. And so then Battaglia, now that he's kind of set up this concept of trial by media and the armchair jury and then wrongful exoneration, he then gets into a discussion about some of the problems that these wrongful exonerations introduce. And he talks about the stigma of actual versus perceived injustice. So he says that if the CJ system makes a mistake, the public reacts negatively. If the mistake is a wrongful conviction, then the public reacting negatively is appropriate. Okay, wrongful convictions obviously are bad. However, if it's a wrongful exoneration, then Battaglia says that the negative public reaction in and of itself is not appropriate. Okay, so basically, to break this down a little more, when the CJ system acts, the public takes notice, and then they form an opinion. All right. So obviously, in the Casey Anthony case, she was charged, right, with the murder of her daughter Kaylee. The public sees this, they form an opinion. The media then takes hold, and they attach to the trial, and they amplify that public opinion, right? And they get people, amped up about their feelings on the case. But when the media, when the CJ system acts incorrectly, the media and the public will react with disdain for the mistake. Okay. So if there's a mistake made by the criminal justice system, there's going to be a negative reaction. All right. Now, Battaglia is saying that if the mistake is something like a wrongful conviction of an innocent individual, then the media being upset and the public being upset is justified and it's appropriate. However, in the case of a wrongful exoneration, technically the system worked. Okay, because again, if we go back to that presumption of innocence and proven guilty, if the system acquits somebody, then technically the system worked. All right, because again, that presumption was that this person was innocent going in. All right, so when we have a situation where someone is acquitted, technically the system worked. All right, but because we had the media involvement, and because we have the armchair jury created, and we had this situation where so many people, were hyped up about the verdict, and we have this wrongful exoneration situation, the public reaction is technically not appropriate. Okay? The public should be happy because the system worked, but they're not because of the wrongful exoneration situation. All right, so then Battaglia goes on to discuss some problems caused by a wrongful exoneration. It creates the impression that the criminal justice system is not working, that the system is soft on crime, and that the major players in the system are incompetent, right? So that our judges and prosecutors and defense attorneys and also our jurors are incompetent, all right? And that this stigma affects the entire system. It makes the appearance that there's loopholes that defendants can exploit, or that the burden of proof is too high. Okay, so a number of problems here are basically made by this wrongful exoneration situation. Okay, and he goes on to talk about some other reasons why this occurs, but let's just get back to the Casey Anthony case and some specific problems that we saw with respect to the wrongful exoneration in the Casey Anthony case and some of the backlash that came after Casey Anthony was acquitted. So Battaglia argues that the wrongful exoneration and the negative publicity about the case could jeopardize Casey Anthony's later criminal cases. Okay, so we know that Casey Anthony had later trials for some additional unrelated offenses like theft and check fraud. So the fact that there was so much negative publicity about the case, the initial case, the murder case, could taint later proceedings. Battaglia also points to substantial problems for jurors that were involved in the Casey Anthony case. So the judge in the case, Belvin Perry Jr., actually withheld the names of the jurors for about 3 months. But after that 3 month lapse, that the jurors' names and information became publicly available. And then people started to harass the jurors that acquitted Casey Anthony. So, specifically, juror 12 had to quit her job. She was a few months away from retirement, but she had to quit her job because she was being harassed so much. And she actually had to leave the state of Florida due to the harassment. And she told the press later, she said that she would rather go to jail than serve on a jury and go through something like this again. So basically, the fallout from her being on the Casey Anthony jury was so bad that she said she didn't want to participate in jury service again. So, thus this problem of trial by media can actually undermine our juries and undermine our system. There were also some problems for the defense attorneys. So Chenny Mason, who was one of the chief counsel for Casey Anthony, reported that he and his family received death threats and prank calls. So again, a problem created by the massive media portrayal of the case and the anger that this incited in people. And also some fallout for the prosecution as well. So the prosecution came off looking very incompetent, and especially because in the beginning the media was on their side, right? And so Nancy Grace and some of these other commentators actually had a strong pro-prosecution bias, but then blasted the prosecution when they failed to do their job. Okay, so again, we see problems here. All right. So again, just keep in mind that in some respects, the the fact that Casey Anthony was exonerated suggests that the system actually worked. But because of this concept of trial by media, the fact that the media presentation of the case was so pro prosecution, so biased, it created this armchair jury at home where people got so angry and so hyped up about the verdict that then they were disappointed when the actual criminal proceedings did not bear out. Okay. And so we had this wrongful exoneration situation. So basically, that's what Battaglia is arguing. So that pretty much wraps it up for the discussion. As always, if you have any questions about the case or the Battaglia piece, I encourage you to shoot me an email and I would be happy to address them.